Ministers Class, July 21st, 1969, Dr. E. W. Blighton, Channel 1, 3 3/4 speed.
This lesson, titled Human Body, Human Soul, can also be heard on tape number 604.
Lessons and the body and so forth, and I noticed that we have totally missed one thing particular, and that is the fact that all of these things and functions of the body revolve around the soul. And somehow or other, we have forgotten all about this. And somehow or other, without a soul, everything becomes sort of null and void. And I think we have to go back and pick up on soul somewhere along the line. We have what you call missed the boat. And that's for sure. Because when we have missed the work of the soul and we don't understand it in conjunction with the body, then we've missed the works. Because without that, it's all useless. If you don't understand the relationship of soul and mind and body, I don't know what, we'd be sort of a cadaver walking around, wouldn't we, with them. Rather purposeless, and particularly without goal of any kind. So tonight I'm going to start out with the work on the soul, and I'm going to follow it straight through until we get through the personality and individuality and get a composite idea of this thing before we go on with the work of the different organs and so forth, because I don't think you're going to understand it unless you do. They're so intermeshed here. Remember, we have talked consistently all through the classes, not only this one, but every other class, of how when you had a disease, it showed in your personality. It showed in the countenance, the face. It shows in the eyes. It shows in many things. Well, now, your personality shows up in your face and its various features, because many of you have had seen this demonstrated as an individual came into the light. You have seen how this individual changed. Well, if this is true, then we better find out the ultimate workings and reality of the soul itself in order to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about healing. Tonight, I think that we'll touch upon the first part of our studies, and this is soul. I do not think that the question which has so often been asked is, what level? Where is it? What vibration is it on? And then finally, when you fail to answer these three, then you get the fundamental answer, question, which is, what is the soul? Why is it so important to us now, as we have seen many things that are related to it and the body? Surely our studies in various levels have led us to realize that the soul is not of such material nature that we can hope to sense it in an objective way until we have sensed matter, or the material part of the body, till we have reached a point where we can see the self. We have come to see that even the blood, though visible to us, has an objective sense, contains that which cannot be seen or perceived objectively. We have come to understand that the blood cells and the plasma of the blood, that which we easily see and have always recognized as being the blood of man, these cells are after all only a medium for carrying through the system the real power and the real energy which cannot be seen. One great fact is quite evident, and that is that it may be axiomatic, really, or it may be purely colloquial in its remarks, but we can know the soul. We can know it. We can understand it. We can see a mirage or image of it, but only through its function and its manifestation and the radiation of the power of energy of the self. But the functioning and the manifestations of the soul are so definite, so distinct, that we cannot make a mistake. We cannot easily mark or define the periphery of what functions of the human exist belong to the soul, because it is all encompassing in all major functions. We can mark a definite path, though, from the eye of man into the reality of self, as we can define those which belong to the heart of man. Furthermore, these clear and unmistakable functions of the soul cannot possibly belong to any other part of the functions of man's existence than that of the soul. In fact, as one great mystic once said, if we had never been told, never even heard or read a word about the existence of a soul in man, our studies and experiments in the existence of life with his multiple functions would have forced us to create or invent a soul account for what we observe and know. And we use the term soul account as being an object or a form existing in some way which we knew not of. But it was the only way in which we could explain these things. It must have existed. In other words, like in the time of the last planet appeared in our solar system, we did not see the planet for 3 years, I think it was, 3 or 4 years, before this time it actually appeared. About 4 years before it actually appeared, they calculated where it was, its orbit, its size, and its movement. Because other things happened. The reaction of other planets, the function of other planets, it had to be there. And that's where it was. So likewise, there are things about the human organism, the body, the processes of thinking, the realities of movement, the relationship of man to God, and so forth, the relationship of man and his path through life, his cycles of life, the things that come to his memory. There are so many things that without this point of soul, he could not explain them. God created man out of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Now, this is, you see, remember this term, living soul. This is not just a supersensitive cell in which we store up something. This is a living organism, a living soul. We truly do take this statement literally. I believe our teachings have shown us that the first part of that statement is true. Every form of science is proving to us that man's material body is composed of earthly elements, that man materially and physically is of the earth, the negative elements of the earth. Man's body is made of the dust of the earth. It is like unto the clay image, molded, wetted, and formed in clay, like a pot in the potter's hand. We compare the lifeless body of man with that of a man who was lying beside it asleep. What was the difference? So far as the objective sight was concerned, these were similar. All organs were there in both bodies, all parts, all forms, all materials. In each there was the spirit, the essence of matter. But in one there was life, and the other there was not. In one breath was passing freely to and fro, and the other there was no breath. We also noted that we were sure, as we made these observations, that in one the immaterial something was absent while it was still present in the other. Therefore, the conclusions were that the soul, whatever it might be, was absent in the lifeless being. In other words, we most naturally assume that life, soul, breath are related. We should know at this time in our studies whether this is so or not. Our work should have proved to us that there is a very close relationship between the breath and the panacea of life and the psychic radiation and emanations of being, between the breath and the psychic body of man, or the electrical structure. This relationship is evident in the writings of the old mystics and the philosophers. In fact, there is evidence that the soul and the breath were related in the writings that remain from the dawn of civilization. If we take the oldest language, going back to the Zenavesta, if we take this old language, the language of the Atlanteans, and the languages that followed it, the Sanskrit, and then the Greek, the Roman, the Latin, and nearly 50 other old tongues, we find that the dictionary, as you would say, that the word soul and breath were synonymous, using the same root. We find when the ancient peoples, through their most learned teachers, wished to express the soul quality of being, they used the same word that they used for breath. And most of them used a distinction between spirit and soul. By this we find that the oldest thinkers knew the relationship that soul and breath remained towards man's existence the reality of being. For example, the ancient Stoics held that the divine principle, or the first cause of the universe itself, was pneuma. That was Pneuma, the breath of God, which permeated all things. This breath manifests in the series of creative laws in matter, or what we term spirit. It became the physical laws which science knew and studied. In man, his breath, or the logos, meaning law. Because soul, which moved man in the spiritual sense, could not be avoided. Even though we are agreed that the soul and the breath are so closely related, we have discovered little regarding the soul in a concrete way. This is what we must try to do. We can only try, we can only hope to know the existence. We cannot demand to know, for it is that part of us which has nothing to do with our objective material lives directly, and since our knowing and knowledge can be based only upon the objectivity senses, we must depend upon the sensing, the soul, the subjectivity, and with the soul essence in the being. The very first point that we discover about the soul is its divine nature. That is, it is of God, so to speak. It is part of. We are sure, naturally, the question arises, what do we mean by God? That is why our first lesson of this level, this understanding, is devoted entirely to the subject of God. And by the way, we had considerable troubles in our tests along this line. It seemed that these simple questions were so simple, even after all of the work we've had on it, that they still were the stickers from which we were working, of course, naturally, because everything has to start here, and everything has to work from this point. But we were stuck on our tests. It was difficult for us to talk about them. Now, I'm not saying it was difficult for us to be accurate. I'm saying it was difficult for us to talk about them. You may have different words for explaining anything and still be right. But you can't be right if you don't have any words at all. That's the point. And this is where I find the point of knowledge in many of the people who took these tests recently. They just did not know. They couldn't express it. They might have sensed it, but they couldn't express anything. And we're not looking for a perfect answer because I don't think we've reached that point yet of having a perfect answer. But you should be able to express it. And of course, it does take feeling in order to express, even with words, something on this level, where it ties the life and breath and being to the totality of function of man. Because without it, he wouldn't do very much. If we recognize God as that great divine power and intelligence which animates the universe, we can readily see and understand how the soul is a part of that intelligence and power. God and the soul are divine because both represent the infinite and supreme, the first and great cause and principle of all creation. To the mystic, that which is supreme, that which is infinite, a part of the first great cause, is divine. In no other sense do we mean the word. In no other sense is it ever applied. Therefore we say that the soul in man is a part of the divinity. Why is it there? How is it come to be there? And it's part of its scheme of creation are the next important parts to be conceived and considered in the reality of being. What purpose does soul serve as a divine entity, an immortal element residing temporarily within the human body? This is the question which should be propounded upon now. Here is our point of consciousness, the intersection of wisdom of the infinite. This is the question which should be thoroughly known. Look at man's existence from the purely materialistic point of view. The soul, granting its existence in man, serves no purpose not already served by all the physical functions and attributes of material man. That is, of course, from the materialistic point of view. The attempts several years ago by Messrs. Loeb and Littlefield to create living organisms artificially by a process called spontaneous generation proved that the living organisms could not be artificially created except so far as to a process of bringing together the necessary mineral elements was concerned. The life or vital forces that animate such an artificial generated organism is not created and remained unknown. However, such experiments, often repeated, seem to prove that life was purely a chemical action, something which resulted from the action of several groups of elements upon one another under certain conditions. Such a history would leave a question of vital life free of the principle of divinity. Man's brain would be all there is to intellect or the intelligence, and consciousness would be a simple action and reaction or reflex action due to material stimuli from the mineral elements, whereas life would come principally from the air breathed into the lungs, which, bringing with it certain vitalizing elements of the chemical nature, just as an electrical current animates a motor, with nothing divine, nothing superphysical, nothing pertaining to the soul connected with it. In such a chemical, materialistic theory of life, still propounded by many men of science, soul has no place in the scheme of things, and therefore soul does not exist, since there is no necessity for it. Even the theological explanations for the existence of soul and its purpose in the human body did not make the soul a necessary attribute to man's earthly existence or development. If the soul were placed in man's body to give him a degree of divinity, to make him simply an image of God and nothing more, it either has had no effect upon man's morals or development, or it has failed to fulfill the unknown purposes devised by God. If the soul were placed in man simply to give man an immortal attribute, a something into life after him and awaiting a day of spiritual existence, there would be no practical purpose served. The only purpose served by such an explanation or reason for the soul's existence would be to foster the theological idea of a final judgment day, a day when all the souls released from the earth for the millions of years would come together to be judged and to suffer punishment or receive reward. This theological idea has long since been shown to be illogical and not in keeping with nature's other laws and principles. Therefore, there must be another reason for the existence of the soul. For though upon this subject at this time, we may consider what the mystic philosopher Spinoza said. He affirmed that when man is self-conscious, that is, when he is aware of his own existence, which soul makes possible, then God realizes himself, because the self of man is the self of God. We shall think and meditate upon this one for our future week. Is there any questions on this? Yes?
Earlier in the lesson, you said soul was really would have to be created because it was really necessary to have this function. Then you gave the argument that soul, if you look at it from a completely materialistic point of view, soul would be completely unnecessary. Everything that goes on in life should be explained from chemical reactions.
It's said from a chemical, materialistic standpoint of view. Yeah. If you don't take both sides, you can't debate within yourself, can you? You hear what I mean? Here's a point which is most potent. Be right with you. That's all. A true mystic, a true person of divinity is a true man within himself. He may look at both the sides of any question unprejudiced. Until he does that, he has not reached the point of being a true God-man. Because if you have prejudice, then you do not have wisdom. Because under no circumstance can wisdom have prejudice. It can't exist. Because logic is not wisdom. Yeah, does that make... Okay. Kennedy.
The ending part of the lesson, that's the feeling of rather than the soul being that according to very close to the self.
Well, it's the shell of the self. I should say it's close. It's the overcoat, you might say.
So why would the soul be this living, such a living thing as the self is? In other words, that's the best way to ask it. What's the difference between the self and the soul?
One's recording. One is the living recorder, and the other is the living liver. No, it's the living liver. That's right. Yes. Because it is the only form which self has. Only eminent form which self has.
You say it's the recorder, right?
Yeah.
Of various incarnations. I was wondering.
Till it's wiped out.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. I was wondering if somewhere on the point of the goal, if you begin to start going backwards, by going backwards, you dissolve.
I've been going backwards a long time
Well,
now.
you went forward, but when we say backwards.
I know.
But sort of like going backwards, and as they get closer and closer to going to the origin of the source, the soul sort of like moves or dissolves itself so you can see the self. Like when you
Oh, you can see the self without it dissolving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see through it. As far as that's
But I mean more
concerned.
clearly, because you have to sort of reduce the sheet.
Well, you can't see more clearly than that is, because if you can't go to the center of self anyway. Can't be done. No, it would be just like working out a empirical formula. You start with nothing, and if you integrate long enough, you will integrate to a point of nothing. And if you wish to go to nothing, then there's the place to go to nothing. But at the same point, never heard of it happening. At least I never tried it.
That one statement that you made at the end, and that Mark used, was that the self looking at the soul helps to realize itself?
What's that? Self looking at the soul helps you to. No.
What was it? It really was. I don't.
What is this? You mean in the lesson or what?
In the lesson, right, the last statement. It came just before the self was manifest.
Spinoza? He affirmed that when man is self-conscious, that is, when he is aware of his own existence, which soul makes possible, then God realizes himself, because the self of man is part of the self of God. He shall contemplate this for reality. Yes? Now look, we've got 8 or 10 more hours of this. Don't try to dig. We just talk about, this is another analytic point or point of study. When you're working in a chapter on something, work in the chapter. Don't try to go ahead of the chapter. Now, if you get a flash of something within your mind or within your being, fine, put it down as a question. But keep through until you get the totality of the thing on the subject. We will go all the way through here, and we have someplace in the neighborhood of, probably 45 sheets of statements and so forth, and from the soul through the personality and individuality and so forth, so that you get man's relationship to himself and his building. You get what I mean by that now? Yeah.
I want to understand the sensing
Well, we just mentioned that, didn't we? Well, we'll come right into this, and you'll get you know what the objective and subjective is, of course, and You know, therefore, that those things which are to do with those things you don't see, where the category they go in. So you know those things that you do see, you know what category they go in. Well, then you must know where the reality and relationship of the soul and so forth is, except for its extraneous effects. You get what I'm talking about now? No? Well, let's follow through and I'll see if you pick it up. Let's discuss here now the study that condition, usually called personality, often confounded with that which we sometimes call individuality. These two words or terms are often used to mean the same condition, but to us they should not be so. They are much like the terms reality and actuality or other terms of this nature. There is a definite distinction between them. The English dictionary makes these two words almost synonymous. We read that personality is that which makes for personal existence or identity, or that which constitutes distinction of the person's individuality. We are told the character peculiar to an individual, the sum of characteristic traits. Let us see and begin to understand what this sort of definition really means. To us, the definition in the light of truth, the mystic knows the personality. Personality cannot pertain solely or even partly to one's physical countenance or material appearance. One's personality may reveal itself, even veil itself, in the clothes one wears or in the mannerisms of physical expressions. Likewise, in one's home and in its furnishings and its environments, books, friends, hobbies, pastimes, and pleasures. Personality may be revealed or veiled. Personality is that subtle quality of the inner man which reveals itself at times in those material elements of the human manifestation on earth, which we notice as character traits and group into a mass individuality. Individuality, on the other hand, pertains solely to those material qualities and attributes of or expressions which constitute characteristic traits. Individuality is then the outer manifestation of the personality, plus education, habit, thoughts, and creed. It is the cloak we wear to hide the naked body, and just as cloaks are changed, so the distinctiveness of the individuality is changed from time and occasion, and it is sad to say also a fashion changes. To continue the simile, one might say that the personality is the naked body under the changeable cloak of individuality. The important matter to be considered here is what constitutes the personality of man. It is the personality of man, or the soul personality, as we call it, which is most concerned we are most concerned with in all earthly existence through the reincarnation of man's soul. Reincarnation of the soul, as we shall see, is for the purpose of evolving the soul personality, that it may attain a certain goal. But the lessons learned by the soul personality in its process of evolution are the use of man, are the use to man only through the personality he expresses in each incarnation. In a few words, personality may be said to be the mind of the soul, just as the individuality may be said to be the brain of the material body. In using the word mind in this case, a distinction is made between mind and brain, which distinction is and should be familiar to all. The subjective faculties or attributes of the mind are particularly referred to in all references to mind of the soul. Personality has as its principal elements the soul's storehouse of memory. If we assume or firmly believe that in the first incarnation the lessons learned today are able to serve us tomorrow or a year or 10 years hence, we must admit that the memory has its vault and its storehouse of facts and experience, pictures and impressions, and the materialist will claim that memory and its possible storehouse are the faculties and functions of the brain, a physical thing associated with a subtle mind, or an unknown soul. He will point to the fact that the indisputable fact that a blow upon the head or a clot of blood upon the brain will prevent the brain from remembering a past impression. The fact is that the injury to the brain will affect recollection and conscious memory. It is a fact also that a blow upon the head or an injury to the brain may remove or affect the desire to eat or the desire to drink, but not even the materialist would claim that this proves that the injury to the brain removes or destroys the existence of hunger or the existence of thirst in the body. The brain is an organism of the body through which all the emotions and desires are consciously realized and find their power to function or manifest outwardly. To injure the functioning of the brain is to affect the conscious, objective realization of facts or impressions, and that is all. We may close or obstruct the threshold which leads from the inner subjective to the outer objective chamber, but such shutting off of the free passage of thought does not destroy the thought, and most certainly the blockade does not prove the non-existence of the chamber beyond. That the memory is stifled and made non-manifest by an injury to the brain does not prove that the memory resides in the material outer chamber of the human body. Paralysis may make mute the inactive, even physical faculties and muscles of the human body, to that existence where no sign or signal of intelligence may be expressed, but the mind will continue to think and have within its chamber many thoughts unable to manifest objectively. Am I reading too fast? Huh? All right. If we admit the possible existence of a storehouse of memory in which all facts and impressions consciously realized are stored away for future use, it is just as a little point to yield that the great archives, this temple of experience, this chamber of pleasures and sorrows, this school of lessons learned, this chart of likes and dislikes, the encyclopedia of facts, this court of justice and retribution, the record of impressions, this resort of test and trial, this tribunal of decision between right and wrong, this combination constitutes in each existence the personality of the human being. Now let us take, the last portion. Be glad to. If we admit the possible existence of a storehouse of memory in which all facts and impressions consciously realized are stored away for future use, it is just a little point to yield that this great archive, this temple of experience, the temple of pleasures and sorrows, the school of lessons learned, the chart of likes and dislikes, and the encyclopedia of facts, the court of justice and retribution, this record of impressions, this resort of test and trial, this tribunal of decisions between right and wrong, this combination constitutes in each existence the personality of the human being. Well, all right, let's see what these other questions are. Okay, give us the other one.
The Father created the suns. There must have been an imprint of that first creation coming into existence. Is that the first record on the soul?
Let me see if I understand you right. You mean that when God created the sun, then He created the sons of God on the earth? You mean one was a replica of the other in the soul?
Well, I'm just thinking individual
All right.
because the sun up there has a soul. Is it not?
It has a great being on it, that's true. In it.
Okay, I'm speaking of that. Not the physical manifestation of the sun that physical manifestation represents.
Well, the whole thing is one.
Okay. So that when the Father created the sun, now, if I have the idea of the soul right, it's encasement around itself, where the expression of the Father created.